Welcome to Meet Me for Coffee. Today my guest is Jerry Buie, and Jerry Buie took me on an amazing adventure to Mongolia, to the reindeer people and the tribe in the West Taiga on the Russian border, and we got to know each other very well on a amazing horseback journey into this adventure that words cannot even describe. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Jerry Buie, and I want him to tell you about how he got into this world of being a spiritual activist and sharing his knowledge about his many ways of integrating all these fabulous tools. Jerry?
All right. Well, it's a long story. It's about 25 years long, so we'll keep it within 25 minutes. Sorry. About 25 years ago, actually, my partner and I began a relationship with a group of Native American elders. And they kind of took us under their wing to help us understand traditions around the two-spirited concept and Native spirituality and community. That led to this deep and growing relationship that led to meeting people through many indigenous and cultural traditions and approaches to spirituality. And so we met people who worked in the Yoruba traditions, the Santeurian traditions, South American traditions, many different Native American elders and wisdom keepers. And eventually, at some point, we got invited to go to a trip to Peru. And on this trip to Peru, we spent 14 days in places like Lake Titicaca, working with the Andean people and people from the Amazon. And it just kind of, my mind has continually, it's like an onion that keeps peeling back these different layers. And relationships lead to other relationships. I think our ability to relate with these indigenous wisdom keepers, we understand how to be respectful and quiet and to hold space in a good way. And so that's just led to these multiple relationships and our own tutoring and apprenticing around these traditions. And this trip to Peru, I've led many trips to Peru, probably 8 or 9 to different parts of that country. Because of the relationships I was able to build there. And my engagement with the Mongolian community happened later in my life. But the first time I went to Mongolia, I did a little research and I thought, oh wow, shamanism is an important component to Mongolian nomadic life. And so I met some university professors and asked some questions. They introduced me to a small group of shamans who were intrigued with my curiosity around their traditions and shamanism. And so now 5 or 6 years later, I've continued building that relationship. And, and I think it's just, that's how it's happened. I've just kind of put my life in the hands of Spirit. Spirit has taken me to very interesting places and interesting people. And I'm very much drawn to the indigenous, like, how does this work in indigenous communities today? And yeah, I mean, that's very abbreviated, but that's how it's led us to where we're at today.
So, I mean, I love that. My spiritual journey is a little bit different. Through visions, I always have crazy visions. I always relate it to my near-death experience and my coma, because I see people, and that's generally who I'm drawn to, because I know they're here to assist me, to get me on my path. That's how I met with Meladoma. That's how I worked with Cindy Dell. and other people, you as well, Bruce as well. So how do you go about, like, if somebody was interested in or felt called to have a session with you to explore some of these different ways of integrating being more spiritual in an indigenous way, more than how we've been programmed in the Western world, spirituality,
Sure.
like what is your, like, my thing is more ritualistic and connecting more with nature. So like, what are some of the ways that you feel as a community somebody could actually bring that more into their beingness?
Well, I think westernized culture does a very good job of trying to compartmentalize spirituality with other parts of their lives. So Monday through Friday, we go to work. Sunday, we go to church. And so we've been acculturated to look at our spirituality in a very compartmentalized approach. And I think all the things you talked about are great tools. But to me, the essence of being spiritually mindful is really a daily walk. Like, how do I exist and coexist with everything and everyone around me on a daily basis? And so I love to hike. I love to be outdoors, and I certainly feel a kinship there. I love ceremony and ritual. But I also recognize that I can sit and be very quiet in my home. I can light a candle, and that is enough ritual and ceremony to help me find that focus. When I'm driving in traffic on I-15, I can be mindful about how I'm interacting with my fellow drivers. When I meet with clients, right? All of these are tools. So to me, sometimes I go out and do something deliberate as a reminder and a place to get refocused. But ultimately, for me, this is a daily endeavor. It's a way I live my life.
Yeah, it's not a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Right?
Altars are nice, but they're not terribly practical, like when you're in the car. No.
Absolutely. So, so when somebody like reaches out to you for something, say they feel called or they feel some kind of discourse or disturbance, how do you kind of incorporate your indigenous aspects into, like, creating balance, basically, right, within their being? Because the mind will get in the way and create unnecessary chaos. So do you start with like baby steps of creating an altar, maybe, or a step where you have them start journaling? Like, what is your process to help get them more mindful or in tune with who they are?
Well, so, there are times when I've had people, for instance, who might call and say, hey, I'm struggling with something, or I need to kind of find this attunement. And there are certain ceremonies and rituals that I can run a person through. But what I find myself doing at the end of that time is I try to tune in with that person to find out what would work with them. So I had a guy come down from Washington not too long ago and spent 2 or 3 days with us. And I did a bunch of ritual and ceremony and just kind of intuitively connect it. And what I recognized is this is an individual who needed some ritual to help him focus his prayer and focus his intention. And so I gave him just a very simple ritual to engage in. And he contacted me like a month later and is still doing this ritual and has talked about that moment, which is a very kind of moment of mindfulness, has helped him find his attunement. Whereas someone else I might recommend maybe a sweat lodge, or so it's just kind of very individualized. I think I think a lot of us are walking around very blind. And sometimes, we're in the middle of this quarantine with the coronavirus, right? And I find it really interesting that people are really struggling with the idea of sitting still, right? And yet some of us, I'll speak for myself, kind of grew up in a world where we didn't have, 200 channels or the internet. And I'm kind of being reminded of how things were when we were growing up, and I kind of like it.
It's funny. Nothing in my world has changed so much with this virus. I mean, I'm more conscious when I go out, but as far as like washing my hands, that's common. The toilet paper thing, I don't understand at all, which is fine, but I understand the energetics of it. It's a behavior of another, but I'm a green eater. I'm a clean eater. I processed food, just the whole thought of that would probably create more challenges for me because I mostly eat healthy. So it's, definitely interesting, but I want to hear your opinion about this virus. For me, I think it is this collective, universal thing happening where we become, more of like a oneness world, not this, segregation and separation where, like, when I do sit in rituals with Malidoma, we all speak whatever we're called to talk about so we can be authentic in our voice and talk through whatever ailment or whatever expression is going on without judgment, because we all have different perceptions, and what's going on with me is not the same can of worms that might be going on with another. So just to honor and validate, and the feelings are okay, because a lot of people, I find, it's the feelings, like what we feel. Our feelings aren't authenticated a lot, and sometimes they're the disruptor. I feel this way, or what's your call? I want to hear your story
about the virus and what this is doing to us.
As far as a whole collective community.
Well, what we're learning about the virus, and maybe even broadening out to the natural world, is it's equal opportunity, right? And so, I think as a global community, and certainly here in the United States, we have become incredibly segregated in our own little pockets, right? So Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, even globally, right? We've kind of just been grumpy with each other, and I think the virus is. You remember when your mother comes and finally says she's had enough and grabs you by the ears, and it doesn't matter who is the instigator, you're both going to get it, right? And so I feel like in many ways, Mother Nature is like, shut the fuck up, focus, right? And we need to figure out how to be a global community. We saw this with 9/11. Of course, then the afterbirth of that was a lot of anti-Middle Eastern kind of attitudes. But there was a moment there when the country came together and the world came around to support what happened to us in 9/11. And we've lost sight of that. I also think the natural world with this virus is suggesting we need to be accountable and culpable for what we're doing. And it's interesting how people are responding to this, because I think the fear and what's happening in relationship to the fear is an interesting symptom of how committed we are globally to the stories of fear, which is, we perpetuate that on each other, right? Should be afraid of the Russians, should be afraid of the Koreans, right? We perpetuate these stories of fear, and it's deep in our psyche. And I think if we just paid attention to what Gaia, the mother, is calling for, and if we can find the essence of the beauty of our relationships together, To me, the pandemic is how we're interacting with each other. And I think if we could find a balance with our neighbors globally and locally, I think we could really find the true medicine and magic in our existence right now.
Absolutely. I with Facebook, my cute little neighbor messaged that she'd gone to Costco to get toilet paper and she needed toilet paper. And in hindsight, I messaged her and said, hey, I have some extra. Don't panic. It's just my dad and myself here. I'll share. So I think as a community, just more sharing and caring, and especially like the elderly, like how the grocery stores have set time aside to assist with that. I mean, I've reached out to different people, like, I'll come work for free. Where can I assist? And even as far as small businesses, like skeleton crews, especially grocery stores, whatever, to, create safety with this virus. But I think globally and socially, it's, getting past the differences, whether you're white, black, gay, straight, purple, green, Russian, African, wherever you're at in your village, and to share, your peace, your joy, all of that. And, just to honor other people in their different villages, I
want to talk about toilet paper.
Yes.
Could you imagine? So we've run into this toilet paper. Well, I think this is symbolic of something that's very interesting. We have to profoundly and deeply and revolutionarily rethink how we're existing in the world. And take toilet paper. We're out of toilet paper. We are acting as if toilet paper is the principal process of which someone wipes their ass. And could you imagine what would happen if we all kind of embraced the concepts of a bidet? Could you imagine how that would impact our environment? How many trees we could save if we just used a hose and sprayed our ass off versus being dependent on 4 pieces of toilet paper to wipe our ass, which is not terribly hygienic to begin with. But, it's these little things that are saying we could rethink our relationship with the environment.
Absolutely. Like, I do my rituals. Like, I have my tree, Tingon and Timbu, the masculine and the feminine. I've always said I live in a fairy realm. I have a fairy dog. You've seen Didymus. He totally is my little fairy dog. But
more of a gremlin. No.
Yeah, my little gremlin guy. But I mean, what I noticed the one day I went to Costco to get toilet paper, most of the people buying, astronomical amounts were, and I don't mean this offensively, but they were morbidly obese. And what I noticed is the energetics on the body, the hoarding on the body. You can imagine the hoarding in the home. So it's this rootedness of not feeling safe in the hoarding, to assist in the grounding of the body. That was just something I was like, this is interesting. But like I said, I don't mean that in a negative way. It was an observation when I was at Costco that, like you said, that was more important than, buying some lettuce or rice or I don't know, something other than toilet paper. Well,
I think sometimes, even as a therapist, when I've worked with people around obesity issues, right? There's lots of things we do. You can call it hoarding, stuffing, layers of protection. And how many people will actually kind of admit maybe there was something traumatic happened, and so then food and gaining weight became a layer of protection. But if you look at what you just said with hoarding, for instance, as a society, as a culture, we have become so disconnected and discombobulated from each other that we're all in this protective place, right? And so we're hoarding and protecting and setting up our bunkers, if you will, when right, most indigenous communities, for instance, are communal in how they relate to each other. Everyone has a place, everyone has a function, everyone contributes, right? And I think definitely here in our American culture, I think our sense of individualism has become some kind of a cultural requirement. And again, I think we have to, when we get to come out of this cocoon, hopefully we are willing to come out differently and reborn, if you will, and to re-examine. I hope we don't lose this moment because of a political debate. That we will recognize that we have this capacity to operate in a communal function so that the rich are as valued as the poor, or vice versa, right? That, I just think there's so much here that has to be re-examined, and this will all be a waste if we come out and we're just as rigid as when we went in.
I agree 100%. And I mean, my friend Corey, he is a trucker and he gets on Facebook every day. He always has anyway, but just listening to him when he's in the truck having a break for 2 hours, and he's showing the emptiness of the roads. And I think what I hope as well, just like you said, like, it doesn't take money to be valuable. We can be kind, it's free. We can be grateful, it's free. We can offer a hand to our neighbors without feeling like we're supposed to be locked in our castle, right? Bigger is like, where is the community? Just like, when I've been to your house, and I love bringing salads, like that community, like, I bring value, that one little piece of ingredient. And I totally agree. We've kind of created this weird segregation of the haves and the have-nots. And it's like, now, like, I mean, I'm more conscious when I go to the store. Do I need this or do I want this? So I'm kind of re-budgeting, I'll say that, more than as far as, I spend a lot of time in my house or my studio alone. So yeah, is there anything else you want to share on that?
Well, just to, you bring up the example of your fabulous salads. But people don't realize, so what you're talking about, Tanya, is when we do a ceremony here at the home, like a sweat lodge or pipe ceremony, there's always a potluck feast, right? And so people bring an item to share at the potluck. And that is part of the ceremony, right? That we're all participants. We want to glamorize the person who's running the ritual, for instance. But traditionally, people would bring food, wood, cloth, tobacco. It was a communal gathering. And because the concept of the circle, right, which is where all these ceremonies are held, is not about hierarchy. It's not about structure. Now, we have the wisdom and the knowledge to run that circle and to kind of hold it. But in actuality, like if you're sitting across from me in that circle, one thing I might be thinking about is, how does Tanya mirror back things about myself that I need to see, and vice versa? There's so much symbolism in the circle, but part of it is that communal gathering. And I mean, that's why it's one of the reasons, right, we don't charge for those things, right? Because ideally, everyone is participating.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I learned in Africa with Melodoma, because we met with shamans one day and did rituals the next day, our prescriptions. And what he said is, which I loved, he said, you know, we are all beggars at some level. Just some of us don't recognize the beggar side of us, you know, and some of us are homeless on some level, you know, and some of us hide in our castles, which I was like, he, like, just the perception, I love, like, our trip to Mongolia, being with these indigenous people. That to me, and my Africa journey, was like so much more where I would rather be than your typical luxury vacation. Not that I don't enjoy those, but I prefer getting into knowing the cultures, and like you said, their spiritual ways and their indigenous ways, and you know, they really do understand life and purpose, and that everybody has a purpose. It's not like the American hierarchy of who's got what and who like the word that comes to mind is a competition. We're not in a competition.
Right. Well, you know, whenever I've taken people to Peru, because when we go to Peru, we're way off the beaten path. Or like I said, Mongolia, like I've taken a lot of students to Mongolia. I've taken, you know, a small group with you. And, you know, we can do the museums and all that stuff. And we do that to get some background. But when we're out in the country and kind of deconstructing our programming, if you will, right? And once we kind of deprogram, then we find that how quickly and more accessible, like when the shamans are reading us, how incredibly accurate they are and how transformative it is. Like with your group, I took a group of people who were very mindful about spirituality, open to these processes. But when I take students, I'm taking people of all different faiths, creeds, life experiences, and almost every time, every participant comes back and will say that was the most meaningful time. And I think they want to put a lot of that responsibility on the shamans, but I think it's a combination of these indigenous folks that we've gone to visit with are living very close and in synchronicity with their environment. And so they're able to channel pieces that perhaps we might not otherwise hear because we're not quite in that same attunement. And so I think the transformative piece of it is the availability and the ability to deconstruct our stuff and to sit in that new story. And then the real work comes with, when I come home, how do I allow that experience to inform myself in the present going forward? Otherwise, it's just an expensive trip. Or it can be incredibly transformative. I took a group of students in October, and I still get emails from them. You know, here it is March going into April, and they're still talking about how transformative the experiences are.
Well, I think too, like, it opens their world to something like, here is, you know, the 9 to 5, the rat race, the slave economy, whatever you want to call it. And it kind of brings them to where we're kind of at right now, is finding our own peace, like stepping out of the chaos that's out there. And we have to come in to know who we are.
Yeah.
To recreate our balance and nurture our inner being, just like nature is still doing nature. My little ditty is still doing little ditty, right? So it's kind of coming back into who we are to become, like you said, hopefully a more evolved world on many levels. Yeah, you can't really put a label on any of that, but I would hope it would bring people more community, like you said, versus segregation and separation.
Yeah. I think this puts a lot of responsibility on, I'll just use a new age word, a lot of these light workers, right? All of us, I have found a particular path that works for me that's connected to my experiences. Some people do different meditative practices, yoga practices. I have a friend who is a guru with food, right? Where food feeds the soul. Um, I did a little Facebook post the other day, and part of my distress is people who are light workers who were kind of in this place of anxiety and fear. And the example I used was the natural world. Look around us. The natural world knows how to handle this. Other than chipmunks, most animals are not neurotic.
I have a
um,
woodpecker in my backyard.
but as humans, we tend to want to gravitate to the place of our neurosis and fear. And as light workers, we have a lot of responsibility right now. Saturday, about the ceremony I'm going to do on Zoom,
Yes.
which I'm just like, oh, how anti-traditional is that, right? But I thought I felt some responsibility. I seriously thought maybe a dozen people would sign up. I have over 50 people who have asked for the link. And these are people, they're literally from around the world, because that's my network is kind of that big, I guess. And I have people that graduated from high school who, like, do you even know what you signed up for? But I think they're responding to that because now people are available to explore, and they're looking for some place of solace. And then you asked, the first question is, how do I work with people? Well, I think the most important thing, what ritual and ceremony and healing practices do, is it can create an experience where people feel something. Maybe it opens them up emotionally, or maybe they have their first aha moment or a vision, right? And we hold that container so that people can have that experience. Once they have that experience, then there's like, well, wow, how do I step into this further? And if you will, our quarantine is no different than a vision quest.
Absolutely.
And a vision quest is about going up on the mountain and asking the creator for insight. And so we're in this really profound process of seeking a vision.
Within ourselves and outer as well, the
Yeah.
whole gambit.
And borrowing Eckhart Tolle's concept of a new earth.
Yeah.
I mean, we're on a threshold of something that's fairly amazing.
Well, and see, that's kind of like, I am holding more of an optimistic venue. Like, of course, like I understand, yes, people are going to die. They're going to transition. That's part of evolution. It's part of life. No one's getting out of here alive. We're all going to shift form eventually. That's part of it. It's the transition through to rise above what no longer serves us anymore.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Jerry, is there anything else you want to share with my audience before we're over?
I just hope that people, I think we just kind of said it, right? This is an amazing opportunity. And not to kind of make this morbid, but, this virus is also asking us to look at our mortality. And if, all these light workers that gather, right, we want to learn how to live life abundantly. And when I say abundantly, just not like in our pocketbooks, but spiritually, emotionally. But I also think it's a beautiful opportunity to look at the question of our own mortality. And see, I think that is kind of like the final ceremony that all of us will walk through. And I think I have my own personal reflection of what that looks like. But I know that this is a moment, whenever I have to look at my own mortality, I have to also ask myself, how will I choose to live life as much as I'm given? And what will I do with each day that's given to me? And I hope that part of our answer is not only how will I live it and experience it, but what might I bring into it for you as my neighbor or my grandchild or my, the good of society. And so I think this is, like I said, I think Mother Nature has grabbed us by the ear and said, pay attention, I'm in charge. And you are all put in time out until you figure this out.
I love that. So once again, Jerry Buie, thanks for joining me for Meet Me for Coffee, and I will see you on the other side. Ashe.
Ashe, bye. Aho.